Good morning, everyone, also from my side, and thank you for the kind introductions, Ulrike and Barbara. I am happy to introduce now the first speaker of our day, which is Kerstin Thomas. Kerstin Thomas is the full professor of modern art history at the University of Stuttgart since 2016. She studied art history, philosophy, and archaeology at the Goethe University in Frankfurt am Main and received her PhD in art history in 2006 with a book on World and Mood, Pouvait de Chavannes, Seurat, and Gauguin, which was then published in 2010. From 2006 to 2009, she was the scientific assistant at the German Center for Art History in Paris, and after 1 year at the Free University in Berlin, she directed a research group on form and emotion at the Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz. Kerstin Thomas was also, as we know, one of the co-initiators of this research project on Gego in Stuttgart, and she will speak to us today about the modernist questions towards form in Stuttgart. With this lecture, she looks at the broader artistic context at the time Gego was studying here. So enjoy.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Stephanie. So I will have to organize a little bit. Oh no. You just switch over. Great, that's good. So in my presentation today, I want to discuss the question of the intertwinement between art and architecture within a specific modern education, which was the starting point of our Gego project, but from a slightly other starting point than Stephanie yesterday. I will begin with the reconstruction of Gego's syllabus, or I don't have to begin with it because it was already showed to us yesterday by Stephanie, who did her research on the syllabus and found out what kind of courses Gego joined in Stuttgart. And I want to focus on the background of this formation, on the relation between arts and architecture in Stuttgart at the beginning of modernism, so slightly earlier than the phase Stephanie was talking about. And thereby I want to ask which concepts of art and architecture were prevalent. A major figure for this question of diffusing the concepts of modern art to the architectural faculty, a person who crystallizes on one hand the artistic concepts of modern art in Stuttgart, and on the other hand the basic teaching of it for architectural students, was Hans Hildebrandt. We heard about him yesterday, and you see here a beautiful photograph in the Kandinsky, Bibliothèque Kandinsky and Centre Pompidou. He was a friend of a lot of artists, so this photography was owned by Nina Kandinsky. And we saw in Stephanie's chart yesterday that the lessons in art history Gertrud Goldschmidt Gego took part in were run by Hans Hildebrandt. As I am a member of the same faculty, Hildebrandt used to be part of it, the Faculty of Art History at the university, it is of particular interest for me to trace the question what these more theoretically oriented courses were like. How did Hildebrandt teach art history for architects? Hans Hildebrandt was appointed as an extraordinary professor for art history in 1912, just after having completed his habilitation on the architectural dimensions in the paintings of Albrecht Altdorfer. So, a painter and he was intrigued by the questions, what could we see in this painting, what is architectural in these paintings. Immediately after this, he fully began to concentrate his research, his publications, and his teaching on contemporary art. His programmatic entrance lecture was as early as 1912 on the artists Picasso, Kandinsky, Archipenko, Mondrian, Lissitzky. Rare were the people who even knew at this time, 1912, it was the year of the Sonderbund exhibition in Cologne and the Armory show, so most of the people didn't even know those artists. We have to keep this in mind. And he already taught it at university. He had a huge engagement for young artists. It is reported that he had visited each atelier and vernissage he could. So he ran around in Stuttgart and he talked to the artists. He would see their production, and he was very much into this contemporary art production. In his writings, we find texts on about nearly every new and avant-garde artist of his time. Between 1924 and 1931, he worked on the volume Die Kunst des 19. und 20. Jahrhunderts, the art of 19th and 20th century, in the prestigious edition of the Handbuch der Kunstwissenschaft. And you see here the title, Die Kunst des 19. und 20. Jahrhunderts, and on the right side, one of the pages with a painting by Paul Klee. He was engaged as well in the new architecture of his time. In 1926, he was the first person to translate Le Corbusier's Vers une architecture. And Siegfried Gideon, the architecture critic, praised Hildebrandt's courageous fight for modern art retrospectively in 1968 as a mission he undertook to teach young people the essential of our culture for the future. Without any doubt, this perspective was encouraged by his wife, the artist Lili Hildebrandt, former Uhlmann, who studied painting in the private school of Adolf Meyer in Berlin, met there Ida Kerkovius, who gave her the advice to study with Adolf Hölzel for a summer school in Dachau. So you see here a photography, and the beautiful young lady in the middle is Lili Hildebrandt, and the woman at the left side down is Ida Kerkovius, who is one of the most important pupils and colleagues later on of Adolf Hölzel. And Hölzel used to run a school in Dachau, which was very, very progressive, and he gave the summer courses, which were joined by a lot of young artists. And afterwards, as you know, surely know, Hölzel moved to the Stuttgart Academy. Lili, get to know in Munich 1905 Hans Hildebrandt, whom she married and followed 1912 to Stuttgart. In Stuttgart, Lili found again the, in 1905, appointed professor for painting at the Academy Adolf Hölzel and continued to study with him in Stuttgart. And you can see here one of the paintings by Lili. This close-knit connection, Lili Hildebrandt, Hans Hildebrandt, and Adolf Hölzel, is crucial for our question, the question of what were the ideas of modern art, of drawing, in a circle of artists in Stuttgart around Hölzel, a circle which was the important nucleus for the development of art theories and practices in the first decades in Germany. A circle where Oskar Schlemmer, Willy Baumeister, and Johannes Itten studied and spread their ideas later on to the Bauhaus. So it was here in Stuttgart that it began, and later on the ideas were transmitted to the Bauhaus. Before I concentrate on this more closely, I want to emphasize once again that Hans Hildebrandt was not a minor teacher in art history for architects. He was one of the earliest proponents of modern art movements in Germany. And he and his wife held in the 1920s an open house in Stuttgart, which was the meeting point for cultural life of the city. Their correspondence reads like the who is who of art of its time. They undertook excursions to Köln for the Sonderbund exhibition and to Paris. Lilly spent some time at the Bauhaus later on, and she had a love affair for several years with Gropius, and she got to know there also Lucia Mohoy, and this is a portrait photo by Lucia Mohoy showing Lilly Hildebrandt. For the Hildebrandts, the professional and the private life were fluently knit. Hans did not forget to include several of the Stuttgart artists in his handbook and thereby build up a specific canon of art. So I brought here some of the pages of his art in the 19th and 20th century, and it's very interesting what you can see there. At the left, you can see a combination of works by, oh, it's very interesting, this point, moving point. So it's Baumeister, Willy Baumeister and Jean Lursa. In the middle, you have Otto Meyer-Amden and Oskar Schlemmer, so pupils of Hölzel. And on the bottom, Fernand Léger, which you can see very easily. And at the right side, a color plate of Adolf Hölzel. So this was the canon he made up in this thick book. And you see also, yeah, Fernand Léger and Edmond Jeannery, I forgot. The circle was cruelly disrupted with the takeover of the National Socialists, as it forced a great number of them to exile. One artist, Maria Lemay, was even deported in 1942 and murdered in Theresienstadt. Lilly, who came from a Jewish family in Fürth, had a proscription to work, and Hans was expelled from university in 1937 for the reasons of his Jewish wife and of his advocacy for ostracized art. So, but Lilly could survive and stay in Stuttgart, but she had to undertake this humiliating examens about her status as Jew or non-Jew and her head form and things like that. This, by the way, is the year 37. Gego did not join the course of art history with Hans because he already was dismissed by his university, but the one of Otto Schmidt on early Netherlandish painting. So if you might ask yourself why she studied then, I think it was just the course which was at offer at 37. Hölzel's courses at the Stuttgart Academy were legendary. We have several records of his open teaching methods and of his understanding of the basis of modern art by notes of his students. A lot of research has been done on Hölzel and his circle, here in Stuttgart, especially by the Hölzel Society, by important art historians in the last times, by Christoph Wagner and Oliver Jehle. Of a special interest is the very developed color theory by the artist, so I just show you here because it's the thing we always connect with the person of Adolf Hölzel, his color theory in this form, or shown by paintings like those, compositions where he combined some color patches. But for our question of the importance of the Stuttgart context for the fostering of a specific way to modern art, I want to point out some other principal fields which seems crucial to me and which paved the way for the new teaching methods Gego could profit from a decade later in the Technische Hochschule. First of all, wall painting. Stefanie yesterday mentioned the importance of wall painting for Gego's teachers at the architectural faculty and discussed the points that wall painting is one field combining painting and construction in one and the same project and could therefore be a model for Gego's later work. When Hölzel was appointed at the Academy in Stuttgart, 1905, he developed his interest in wall painting. So this was another image showing you some of his works in the Staatsgalerie Stuttgart. So he was interested in wall painting, and you can see here an article which was a talk Adolf Hölzel held at Darmstadt in 1908 about wall painting, and which was printed then. The result, I think, this interest in wall painting was also, at least if not awoken, but maybe the result of his friendly contact with Theodor Fischer, urbanist and architect professor at the nearby Technische Hochschule. Fischer was convinced that a building needed the integration of painted surfaces to be complete. He therefore offered to Hölzel important projects for wall paintings in his new constructed buildings. The most important are the Pfullinger Hallen and the 12 wall paintings for the entrance of the main hall in the exhibition of the Werkbund 1913 in Cologne. Hölzel conceded these major works, so these two huge projects, to his master students. So he didn't execute them himself, but he asked his master students to execute them. He just sketched the overall composition. In Cologne, it were Oskar Schlemmer, Willy Baumeister, and Herbert Stenner. As he had such an esteem for the importance of wall painting, and because of the monumentality of this technique, it was impossible to include wall painting in a normal practical lesson at the academy. I mean, where could you practice wall painting? You didn't have walls all the time. So Hölzel therefore took the chance to let his students practice in the wall work for Cologne and the Pfullinger Hallen. And I show you here now some of the paintings in the Pfullinger Hallen. Here is the architecture by Fischer. In the next slides, you can see this hall. It was a multi-purpose hall we have often in this time to come together, to have cultural, sportive, and political discussions. So you can see here the wall painting by Louis Moyer, Ulrich Nitsche, Melchior von Hugo, and Hans Brühlmann. Moyer was the one who traveled with Paul Klee later on to Tunis. And so here we have again Louis Moyer, and here Ulrich Nitschke. I don't know if I have another one. Okay, Melchior von Hugo. As you can see here, the overall structure of the decoration is very different between what the painters did. On the other hand, it was very important for Hölzel, who had this composition plan, that they correspond within a line of the horizons, within a color schema. So his idea was that wall painting shows a difference and has to be in attention to the architecture, to the wall, in between themselves as paintings, but at the same time have some common characteristica. Hölzel's main artistic principle was to create space out of the flat forms. So he thought a lot about painting as a flat form. Painting is a flat form, and so to construct space within a painting and with a painting, it has to be worked out, this flatness, to get the spatiality. For this, he built different layers in his pictures, which each were responsible for different functions and therefore built up a spatial system. Dynamics forms to create space in the foreground, vertical lines to create growing forces in the middle, and horizontal lines to build up a zone of quiet rest. But instead of concentrating these principles mainly on pictures, Hölzel translated them to wall paintings. Hence, he saw in the lines not merely a function to enliven paintings, but a pictorial principle which is per se creating space and is yet even more important for a spatial media as is art on walls. In the conference, which was published in 1908, which I just showed you under the title On Pictorial Artworks in Architectonic Rooms, Hölzel explained further the function of lines within wall painting. Whereas a painting, the picture has its natural frame, the outer margins of a canvas, or like here, of a paper. A wall picture works with the frame of walls, the ceiling, the floor, even the further surroundings. So he was constantly thinking about how to work with the borders of a composition, and you can see this here clearly, that the lines have several functions in this drawing. They close the figures and the forms inside of the plane, but at the same time they react with the outer margins, so they kind of match on it, but they also part from this, so they react to the borders. They just don't just meander through the picture, but they have a tension towards the border. And so his idea is what he developed in paintings and in drawings, this construction lines, is much more important even for the wall painting, because there the whole space of the architecture is something which should be addressed by the lines, by the tensions, because those are the borders. So he worked with the tension in the room through the lines in the wall paintings. To connect here the layers of a painted picture, therefore, means to expand the organizing lines. The layers, Hölzel explains, must be connected by points and lines. And I show you here another, some paper of his Nachlass in the archive, and you can see also in this picture here how he works with light and shadow, with darkness and brightness, but also with the lines who have are spanned like a grid on this. And you can see the forms here listed further downside. Hölzel explains that the layers must be connected to points and lines, nets of lines, grids of lines, and build arithmetic relations. He is talking of a quadrature, of a triangulature. The artist should know this and use it, but only in order to create spatial situations, not as a construction for themselves. Thereby, the line is the most primitive artistic means to create form and space for Hölzel. The line, Hölzel, is the basis for all forms, for it has in itself an architectonic function. So the line is has the function of the architectonic weight of a picture, to hold objects, to build constructive lines which are forces. They open the space, but they also keep the forms in balance. We see the importance of this principle clearly as Hölzel started with this, his basic course in his art class, as we can see in the notes by Lili Hildebrandt, who took part in this course, in a course for composition in the winter term 1910-1911 in Stuttgart. So here are the plates done by Lili Hildebrandt, and there are huge notes by Lili Hildebrandt on this course on Hölzel, where she describes what they had to learn and what the function of the lines is and so on. And therefore, it is not by coincidence that Hans Hildebrandt, in his voluminous book on wall painting published in 1920, I have other plates here, you can see, this is more, oops, you can see here, sorry. You can see here not only formal studies, but also landscapes and so on. But you can see clearly here that they were talking about the construction lines in a composition, the vertical and the horizontal lines. So now, this is the huge book by Hans Hildebrandt, Wandmalerei. It is like this, I think, so I couldn't carry it here. And of course, as his wife Lili Hildebrandt joined the composition course to Hölzel and learned about wall painting, the work by Hans Hildebrandt of 1920 was informed by all this practice, by all the theories of Hölzel, which he got to know directly from his wife. And also Hans Hildebrandt writes long passages on the force and energy of lines and their capacity to create spatiality. The passage even sounds somehow like a paraphrase of Hölzel. It's really strange. It has suddenly the same sound of expressions, and it's very near. Gego, who joined the course in winter 33 and 34 bei Hans Hildebrandt, das Raumproblem in der bildenden Kunst, or the Elemente des künstlerischen Gestaltens. It's not clear which of the two she attended, but I think it's quite clear, given the fact that Hildebrandt was so well informed that he mentioned all the theories by Hölzel in his thick books in the 20s on wall painting, on composition methods, and so on, that when he teaches or the room problem in art or elements of artistic composition, that of course he took material from what he knew, and this was the courses and the theory by Hölzel and his circle. So we can be quite sure that Gertrud Goldschmidt knew by heart the theories of wall paintings and composition and the importance of lines. In this respect, Theodor Fischer, who was appointed as a professor at the Technische Hochschule Stuttgart, the architect, by recommendation of the new director of the Art Academy, Karl Kreuth, and who, Stefanie mentioned it, created a special curriculum, continued by his followers, his students in Stuttgart, in stressing the importance of the intertwinement between architecture and art, found a correspondence in the person of Hölzel, who, from his position as an artist at the Academy, reformed his teaching by stressing on the importance of art to ground on architectural lines. So the artist teaches art as something which has really the basis in architecture, and the architect teaches architecture theory, which has a close connection to art, and who thought, Theodor Fischer, that architecture could not exist without wall painting. So we have from the two sides this intertwinement, from the artistic teaching side, from the architectural teaching side, and both stress the importance of art to ground in architecture and architecture to work together with painting. And work as wall painting in architectural space. Both sides bring this together, art and architecture, to foster art. And I show you again the Pfullinger Hallen as just to that we can understand how important it's not just paintings on the wall. I think you can clearly see this. The whole wall is structured by painting, and the architecture is very clear that there should be some painting on the wall. If not, it wouldn't function so well. It's very basic shapes of the openings, of the stage, of the windows, and also with the lamps and the ceiling, everything matches together. So it is very important to have lines on the ceiling, and the lines were, of course, reflected by the paintings, and we can see here this horizontal shape and the vertical lines together. For this program, also Hölzel, the follower of Kalkreuth as director of the Academy of Arts in Stuttgart, developed a completely new syllabus. Of course, it was the time for reformation in art academies to overcome historicism paralysis. With Peter Behrens in Düsseldorf, Henry van de Velde, Hermann Obrist in Munich. But it was Adolf Hölzel who had a real didactic program. He was the first one to create, after his appointment in 1905 in Stuttgart, the famous Vorkurs, the basic course, an invention which was closely followed by his students Oskar Schlemmer and Johannes Itten, who exported this later on to the Bauhaus, where it started its triumph all over the world. So it was really Hölzel who was the first who coined also this notion Vorkurs as a basic class to entry in the formation of art. And Hölzel invented in the Vorkurs, which intended to teach freely the basis of art and composition techniques by adopting two principles. First, analytic form studies and the teaching of elementary composition laws, its mathematical proportions, which you can see here. This is the first function of the line. And secondly, as a completely free practice to sketch lines without thinking of forms yet to come. With this absolutely innovative teaching, Hölzel paved the way for a whole group of extremely successful and individual artists. You can see some of them here. The mentioned Ida Kerkovius, Hermann Stenner, Lili Hildebrandt, Willy Baumeister, Oskar Schlemmer, and so on. He designated his studies as a laboratory, yet a place where research and intuition as well as cooperative work came together. The institution's academy and architecture faculty held a close connection. It was even initially a plan to unite it, together with the decorative workshop and School of Decorative Art run by Bernhard Pankow. Therefore, it is highly probable that the successful teaching methods of Hölzel, which attired an increasing number of students from the whole country, had a great impact on the teaching in the architecture faculty, which Gego joined 2 decades later, as we can see in her syllabus. And Hans Hildebrandt, who had a first-hand insight in the Vorkurs and the theories by Hölzel developed within the course by his wife Lilly, probably fostered these ideas of a modern art laboratory. At least one of his courses is a practical course. So I have it here again. We could ask if the positive example of a reformated education as an art laboratory played an important role for Gego and her teaching in Venezuela. This would be an interesting question. As I already mentioned, the Academy was also, since its founding in 1829, constantly connected with the School for Applied and Decorative Arts and a workshop for art techniques. The importance of the applied art and the special techniques to work with the different materials installed at the architecture school had also here its precedent. It was Bernhard Pankow, so you see here a self-portrait in Stuttgart, who was recommended by Palkreut and joined the school in 1901. And Eva Freudsheim did a huge exhibition on Pankow, and Pankow is very close also to the Kunstmuseum. And I just brought some examples of his work. So this is the title of the catalogue of the World Trade Exhibition in Paris 1900, where he, yes, and this is some mobiliar by him in the Württembergischen Landesmuseum. And here you can see the Rauchsalon, also in Paris, 1900. So this person was at the head of the workshops in the Academy, and there were a curriculum where artists were trained in these techniques. The possibility to work in other techniques proved to be very fruitful also for the students of Hölzel. We can still see this in the works for theater by Schlemmer, of course, which you can see in the Staatsgalerie, or the glass works by Hölzel himself and of several other artists in his circle, under them Lilly Hildebrandt. But also the interest for textile works arose with this possibility to work in these workshops. Hölzel's student Ida Kerkovius, I can see some painting of her here, studied 1920 in the workshop in Stuttgart the technique of coloring tissues, and as Hans-Dieter Huber found out in her student file. And she went from 1920 to 1923 at the Bauhaus Weimar and joined the workshop of Gunda Stölzel and concentrated on textile works with tapestry. She did all the techniques of tapestry, so this one is a knitted, no, how do you say, geknüpft one? But she also had these other techniques, waving, and she was very gifted, and she stayed a long time with Gunda Stölzel. We can see here this carpet, which is very near to the one Stefanie found in the work of Victoria Regina Minchina, and which she introduced in our exhibition. Hans Hildebrandt, who wrote a book on women artists, wrote as well an article on Victoria Regina, Stefanie mentioned this yesterday, in 1926. And he showed there also the work of Victoria Regina Minchina, the tapestry. What can we learn from all this? I don't know, but Gego had a first-hand knowledge of the construction and form principles of Adolf Hölzel via Hans Hildebrandt, and she followed Hildebrand's course Kunstgeschichte, Form and Color by Adolf Hölzel in the summer 1934. These theories consist in the idea of forces, of lines creating space, of line nets and points to give architectural frames and to unfold energy. At the same time, the Stuttgart modernity, with its wide outreach in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, and the close-knit artistic circle unfolded an enormous power throughout the institutions and initiated a reform program, even if it had some backfalls, which embraced several arts forms and techniques. I want to stop here, and as I surely want to avoid the impression that I want to establish descendants' stories or to overstress connections. I only want to show the cultural rich climate in those years in Stuttgart, a place where Gego stayed some formative years. And I want to characterize this atmosphere not as something which was in the air, but as a result of particular work of particular people working in an open and communicative laboratory. A model we share today and yesterday as well, and a model which then in the 20s continued from to the beginning of the 30s, and which was then only brutally interrupted by national socialists persecuting and endangering them, killing some of them, spreading others out in the world. Thank you very much.